It is the middle of the Antarctic winter, the most hostile place any warm-blooded animal has ever chosen to breed. 60 below, winds that would kill an exposed man in minutes, and out on the ice stand thousands of male emperor penguins, each balancing a single egg on his feet, with no shelter, no food, and no way to survive the night alone. So they do the only thing that works. They huddle, packed together so tightly there are 10 birds to a square meter, sharing body heat, until the temperature in the center of that mass climbs toward tropical warmth while a blizzard screams around them. And then researchers looked closely at that huddle and found the thing that makes it more than a pile. The huddle is not still. It moves in slow, constant, coordinated waves every 30 seconds or so, a small shuffle rippling through the whole mass. And what that movement does is the entire point. The birds on the freezing outer edge are slowly carried inward to the warm center, and the birds who have been warm are slowly pushed out to take their turn in the cold. No penguin gets to stay in the warm middle. No penguin is left to freeze on the edge. The huddle is a machine for one thing: making sure the burden of the cold, which someone always has to bear, is passed around fairly so that everyone survives the night. Sit with that. The colony does not survive the winter because the penguins are warm. It survives because none of them is allowed to stay warm at everyone else's expense. So here is the question this episode answers. Every group you belong to, a country, a company, a civilization, survives only by paying some brutal shared cost. The taxes, the service, the sacrifice, the boring, dangerous work that someone always has to do. And we tell ourselves those systems live or die on how rich or clever they are. But what if the only thing that actually keeps the huddle alive is far simpler and far more fragile? Whether the strongest members can be forced to take their turn on the cold edge, or whether they get to stay in the warm middle forever, while everyone else freezes. If you have ever been part of a group where the same people always did the hard, cold, unglamorous work, while others sat permanently in the warm center and called it their due, and felt the whole thing quietly start to rot, you have already seen this. You just were not told a bird on the Antarctic ice runs the only version of it that actually survives the winter. There is a sentence in the modern half of this story. 9 words, spoken in a private house by a very rich woman, that will one day be repeated in a courtroom and become the most famous confession of an entire mindset ever recorded. The sentence has already been said in this story's future. It is a bomb with a very long fuse, and it says out loud the thing that kills every huddle. Keep it in mind. We are walking toward the moment it goes off in public. Now, Athens, in its golden age, the 5th and 4th centuries before the Common Era. The Athenians had a problem every group has. The city needed expensive things, warships to defend it, festivals to bind it, and someone had to pay. And the Athenians built a solution that is almost pure penguin huddle. It was called the Liturgy. Here is how it worked. Rather than tax everyone thinly, Athens turned to its richest citizens and assigned them, in rotation, the full cost of a specific public burden for a year. One wealthy man would be made trierarch. He personally paid to equip and maintain a warship, and often commanded it. Another funded a dramatic festival. It was enormous, and it was compulsory, and it moved. Each year the burden was passed to different rich men, so that the cold edge of paying for the city rotated through the wealthy the way the cold edge of the blizzard rotates through the flock. And Athens took the fairness of that rotation so seriously that it built a weapon against dodgers. If a rich man claimed he was too poor to bear a liturgy and pointed to someone richer who had been skipped, that other man had a choice: take on the burden or swap his entire estate for the complainers on the spot. It was called Antidosis, the exchange. You want to say you're not warm enough to take the edge? Fine. Trade places completely with the man you say is warmer. Almost no one took the trade. The mechanism forced the truth. It made claiming to be poor cost you everything if you were lying. Athens had discovered 2,500 years ago that the rich will always say they cannot afford the edge, and built a machine that called the bluff. And the genius of the Athenian system was that it did not just force the rotation, it made bearing the edge honorable. A trireme was staggeringly expensive. Funding one for a year could cost a rich man a large slice of his fortune. But the trierarch who did it well, who kept his ship the fastest and best crewed in the fleet, won something money alone could not buy in Athens: public standing, the gratitude of the city, a name spoken well in the assembly. Hundreds of these burdens were assigned every year, and the wealthy competed to discharge them lavishly. Because in that culture, the surest way to be respected was to be seen taking your turn on the cold edge and bearing it magnificently. The huddle had done more than force the rich outward. It had made the warm center slightly shameful and the cold edge a place of honor, which is the most stable version of the rotation there has ever been, because the powerful wanted to be out there. Here is the mechanism, and it is the huddle in a toga. A shared cost that someone must bear does not destroy a group. What destroys a group is when the cost stops rotating, when the same people are always on the edge, and the same people are always warm. Athens survived for a long time precisely because it forced its most powerful members back out into the cold in turn, and made escaping the rotation the one thing you could not do.
But a rotation held in place by law can be unlocked by law.
And 2,000 years later, a kingdom would do the exact opposite of Athens, would write into its very constitution that the strongest were permanently exempt from the cold, and would freeze itself to death in a single generation. If you have ever watched the people most able to carry a burden arrange things so that they, specifically, never have to, while the ones least able carry all of it, then the next story is that arrangement, written into the law of a whole kingdom, right up to the morning it collapsed. Subscribe. Primal Loops finds this loop somewhere new every week. France, the 18th century, under the Old Order, the Ancien Régime. On paper, it was one of the richest and most powerful states on earth. Underneath, it was a huddle with the rotation switched off. French society was divided into three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and everyone else. The third estate, which was about 97% of the population. And the central, fatal fact of the whole system was this: the first two estates, the clergy and the nobility, the wealthiest, most powerful people in France, were largely exempt from the main direct tax, the taille. The penguin who forces his way to the center and refuses to rotate back out. The noble whose birthright is that the cold edge of taxation can never touch him. Read what that means as a machine. The burden of funding the state, the wars, the debts, the court at Versailles, had to fall somewhere, and it had been legally forbidden from falling on the people most able to bear it. So it fell, all of it, on the ones least able, the peasants and the townsfolk of the third estate, who paid and paid while watching a nobility that paid almost nothing. The rich were permanently in the warm center, the poor were permanently on the frozen edge, and the rotation that keeps a huddle alive had been outlawed. And when the crown, drowning in debt, finally tried to fix it, when ministers proposed in the 1780s that the nobility might have to pay a land tax like everyone else, the powerful did the penguins' forbidden move. They refused. The nobility, summoned to approve reform, blocked it, insisting on their ancient exemption from the cold, even as the state slid toward bankruptcy. They would rather freeze the whole flock than take their turn on the edge. And feel the arithmetic of that from the edge. A peasant family in the third estate could owe, between the royal taille, the church's tithe, and the lord's dues, a punishing share of everything they grew, while the noble whose land they worked and the abbot whose barn took the tithe paid, on the great direct tax, essentially nothing. The people with the least warmth to spare were made to heat the entire structure, and the people who could have heated it without feeling the cold were, by law, exempt from ever stepping outside. It was not that the French system asked too much. It is that it asked everything of the edge and nothing of the center, and then forbade, in writing, the one motion, the rotation of the powerful back into the cold, that could have saved it. The sentence is closer now. That rich woman in the modern half is about to say in 9 words exactly what the French nobility said with an entire tax code. The edge is for other people. The French huddle did what a huddle does when the rotation stops. In 1789, the frozen edge, the third estate, stopped shuffling inward and simply tore the whole structure apart. We remember it as the French Revolution. It was, underneath, a huddle that had stopped rotating, doing the only thing a huddle can do when the strong will not take their turn: collapse. So here is the sentence, and the woman who said it. Her name is Leona Helmsley, and in the 1980s she is one of the richest people in New York, a billionaire hotelier known already as the Queen of Mean. The modern state runs on the same fragile mechanism as the huddle and the liturgy. A country's roads, courts, armies, schools, the whole warm center that lets a society exist, are paid for by a shared burden, taxes. And the entire thing depends on the same fairness the penguins enforce, that the burden is shared, and that the most able to pay their turn. The rich pay more not as charity, but because a huddle where the strongest opt out is a huddle that dies. Leona Helmsley did not have to cheat. She had, by any measure, more warmth than a person could use in 100 lifetimes. Hotels, mansions, a fortune in the billions. There was no cold edge anywhere near her. She could have paid every cent she owed and never felt it, and remained, forever, in the deepest warm center a human being has ever occupied. The rotation was asking nothing of her that she would even have noticed. That door, simply pay and stay warm anyway, was not just open, it was effortless. She walked past it. Through the 1980s, Helmsley and her husband built millions of dollars of personal luxuries, renovations to their mansion, their possessions, to their business as fake expenses to avoid paying taxes on them. And in the middle of it, according to the sworn testimony of a former housekeeper at her trial, Leona Helmsley said the 9 words that made her immortal. "We don't pay taxes," she said. "Only the little people pay taxes. We tell ourselves the powerful cheat the system out of need, or greed, or some special wickedness. Look at what Helmsley actually said, and it inverts into something colder and more universal. She was not describing a crime. She was describing a belief, the exact belief of the French noble and the liturgy dodger and the penguin trying to jam himself permanently into the center, that the cold edge, the shared cost, the turn in the freezing dark, is for the little people, that being strong means, precisely, never having to rotate back out. Helmsley went to prison. But the sentence outlived the trial, and the reason it did is the whole point of this episode. It endured because it was not really the confession of one greedy woman. It was the quiet, operating assumption of an entire warm center, said out loud by accident. Everyone already suspected that at the very top the rotation had been switched off, that through lawyers and loopholes and structures the ordinary person will never see, the people most able to bear the cold had arranged, perfectly legally, never to feel it. Helmsley's only real crime, in the end, was saying the quiet part where a housekeeper could hear it. The freezing of the edge she named did not go to prison with her. It is still, quietly, going on. The Athenian dodger who claimed he was too poor. The nobles who blocked their own taxation while the state went bankrupt. A billionaire billing her mansion to the little people. 3 huddles, 3 attempts by the strongest to stay permanently warm, and the same crack opening under all of them. Go back to the emperor penguins, to that slow wave moving through the huddle, because it holds the answer the French nobility never understood. Here is what the researchers found that matters most. No single penguin decides to be noble. No bird volunteers to leave the warm center and march out into the killing cold for the good of the flock. The rotation is not chosen. It is a mechanism, a physical consequence of thousands of birds each pushing toward warmth at once, so that the movement of the whole mass carries everyone through the edge in turn, whether they would choose it or not. The huddle does not run on the penguin's virtue. It runs on a structure that makes permanent free riding physically impossible. That is the loop, and it is the most important one in this whole series to get right. The Athenian Liturgy, the Antidosis that called the bluff, the 3 estates, a billionaire's 9 words. None of these systems lived or died on whether their strong members were good people. Every group has members who would happily stay in the warm center forever. That is not a flaw you can moralize away. It is simply what a warm-blooded creature wants. A society survives only if it builds the huddle's machine, a structure that forces even the most powerful back out onto the cold edge, in their turn, against their will. Athens had it. France abolished it and froze. And the moment any group lets its strongest opt out of the rotation for good, it is already, quietly, beginning to die. The penguins do not survive because they are kind. They survive because not one of them is allowed to stay warm while another freezes. A society does not collapse because its shared burdens are too heavy. It collapses the moment its most powerful members win the right to never carry them. Because a huddle where the strong stay permanently warm is a huddle that has already stopped keeping anyone alive. This is the loop Primal Loops exists to keep finding. The strongest fighting to stay in the warm center while the edge freezes, on an ice shelf, in an assembly, in a courtroom, certain each time that the cold is for someone else. Next week we go small and sharp to an insect that can read a lie right off your face. Subscribe so you are in the room when it does. And before you close this, look at the huddle you are standing in right now. Look at who does the cold, thankless, dangerous, underpaid work that keeps your world running, and who sits permanently in the warm center and has arranged, quietly and legally, never to rotate out. Notice how often the ones in the middle explain that this is simply what they have earned, and how much the whole thing is starting to feel, underneath, like a huddle that has stopped moving. So the only question left is the one you can feel the cold of. In every group you belong to, are you taking your turn on the edge? Or have you found a way, like the nobles and the billionaire and every penguin that ever tried, to stay warm while someone else stands in the dark and freezes for you? Name the huddle you have watched stop rotating, where the strong found a way to stay permanently warm while the same people carried the cold every time. First one in the comments. Animal register. EP20 equals emperor penguin. Huddle rotation research. Distinct species. Locked.